Welcome to the third annual CITL Convocation. You guys like your pencils?
We can do better than that. Welcome to the third annual. Show some love.
East Coast represents. So I'm really thrilled to see so many people here today. It's really kind of moving to me to be in Kresge College. When I came here 20 years ago, my office was in Kresge College. I've taught in this room. I've partied in this room. You know, we see all the folks who've come in here and brought their culture and their music and their wisdom and their goodness here. So it's beautiful to be in Kresge Town Hall. It won't be here much longer, so enjoy it while we have it. So 2 years ago this week, UCSC alumna Susan Longerbeam came to deliver what we audaciously called the first annual CITL Convocation on teaching. Her subject was teaching across cultural strengths. And when she came to visit, CITL had not presented one single piece of programming to the campus. Since then, we've had 45 faculty fellows, 40 graduate pedagogy fellows who've become TA trainers for their departments, 15 undergraduate fellows, a dozen graduate student researchers, 5 certificates, dozens of faculty and graduate student workshops, and I don't even know how many individual consultations. I'm not going to give an annual report, which is what we usually do at this event, about what we've been doing at the CITL, because this is also our first student-facing event. So clap for that, please. We have built the CITL for the students present and future, and we have built it for the teachers present and future, for the faculty who teach here now who never received any training, and for the graduate students who teach here now and play such an indispensable role in ensuring educational equity here, but many of whom will also go on to become the future faculty who we hope will bring humane, humanizing, vulnerable forms of teaching into classrooms here and elsewhere. We are trying at CITL to create the most wholesome, beneficial, and generous relationships among students, faculty, and staff on this campus to support learning here and beyond here, because when learning happens, it's not because one person kicked ass or even because 2 people kicked ass. It's because of a collective, often invisible, and largely unrecognized network of relationships, familial, educational, social, political, that allows learning, or really anything, to happen. Take this event. If I were to name all the people who made this possible today, just from my perspective, I would start with the people who worshiped, walked, and worked this land. Then I would go on to my own teachers and the teachers of my teachers in a lineage going back as long as time. I would include the great tradition of educational vision and innovation that brought so many of us here in the first place, the dream of a public research university that is also an experimental school committed to, even if it does not always achieve, social justice and educational equity. As Dean McHenry, UCSC's first chancellor, put it in 1966, our thesis is simple. In a college setting where a small number of students and faculty go about their daily business in close proximity, it is just that much more difficult to forget that the students are individual, unexchangeable, irreplaceable human beings. So speaking of irreplaceable human beings, I want to thank the groups that have collaborated to bring about this event and Bryan's entire visit. That is the Division of Student Success, Learning Support Services, the Genomics Institute, the HSI Initiatives Team, the HHMI Active Learning Initiative, the STEM Diversity Programs, the First Gen Initiatives, SACNAS, Pudri Diversity, Baskin Engineering, ACE, and MESA. Okay, so that's a really long list of people. I also want to thank my own team, and I would like to ask you to stand up. So we have Nandini Bhattacharya, our Associate Director for Teaching. Jesse Dubrail, our Associate Director for Learning. Kendra Doherty, the backbone of CITL. Our Associate Director for Programs and our Director of all Graduate Student Professional Development, Hillary Bennett. And Jenny Quinn, who receives the lion's share of the thanks for what you see in front of you today. Jenny is our new STEM diversity specialist, and her position is a collaboration between the HSI Initiatives team and the CITL. So it's just another example of what partnership can get you. So thank you to all of you for making this event possible. Which brings me to this event. So I'm not going to give you a big bio of Bryan Dewsbury. He'll tell you his biography, and he'll do it much more entertainingly than I can. I will just tell you that he is one of the nation's emerging visionaries, really rock stars, in the field of inclusive teaching and educational equity. In his spare time, he teaches as assistant professor of biology at the University of Rhode Island and runs the Science, Education, and Society Research Program. He is a full-time researcher of STEM educational practice who helps the rest of us ensure better outcomes for all students. Over a third of Black, Latinx, and Native American students enter college wanting to major in science, technology, engineering, or math, and only about 16% go on to get the bachelor's degree in those fields. Bryan insists that that's not good enough. He says, "My job is to ensure that no matter who you are or where you're coming from, you're going to learn biology really well. I know your doubts and fears, and I'll have your back to the end of the semester or quarter." This attention to the whole student is at the heart of everything Bryan does. As he is well known for saying, we don't teach biology or classics or psychology or 17th century English literature. We teach students. The notion that the teaching of students trumps disciplinary expertise makes it impossible to say that inclusive teaching doesn't matter in my field. It matters in all fields. Bryan Dewsbury is the most inspirational person I've encountered in my time working in the field of educational development. His energy is infectious and his conviction is unstoppable. He insists that we need nothing short of a complete overhaul of higher education in this country. The teachers, that's us. The students, that's many of you. All the other indispensable partners, many of whom are here in this room tonight, and the system as a whole. You in? Bryan says, "What inspires me about teaching is not the dispensation of information, it's the awakening of the soul." With the greatest pleasure, I give you Bryan Dewsbury.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. I want you to keep the applause going for Jody Green for leading this charge. Before we get started, so, you always have to make sure, just in case this doesn't go well. I think it will, but you never know. So I'm going to have the photographer take a picture of me with you in the background. So appear happy like you love me, right? Let's go. From this angle. I just told a funny joke. Laugh, laugh, laugh. Go this side. No, we're inclusive here. We have to get this side as well. See over there? All right, so that'll be in your new school website. How we doing? All right. It's nice to be here. Really nice to be here. These days are tiring, but they are energizing at the same time. And I had the pleasure of meeting so many of you during different points today, and I hope I shared in the process what it means to be able to have these conversations. And a big piece that comes out of it is I've learned that I can't silo parts of my career, right? I can't stay in a lab and publish 20 papers and hope one day that turns into magic. I can't teach in a classroom even if I do it well and hope one day it's just by itself spreads like a virus through the hallways of my biology department. You have to find a way to merge what you know about how we learn or what we know about each other, about social history, what's good in the classroom, with how you implement that in new and unique and fresh situations. So that's what my life is about. So let me start you off with a clicker that works. All right, so that's 4-year-old. Okay, I see you all snickering. In 1984, that was a perfectly fine suit to wear, all right? I'm just saying. So that's 4-year-old Bryan. I do look back at him and say, like, what happened to the hair, man? Really should have appreciated that when I had it. In many ways, what you're looking at is the beginning of my journey. And in many ways, your 4-year-old self is the beginning of your journey, though you may not have recognized that. All right? And it took me into my late 20s to realize how much of the things that I've experienced in my teenage years and in my growing up years has impacted what I see today. Today we're going to talk about how to be a kick-ass STEM learner, but it really is more about, it's more than that. It's not just about going back to your dorm room and doing these specific things. It's really asking yourself tough questions as to why do you do what you do? Why is this important to you? What is your why? So let me tell you a bit of mine. I was born and raised in a country called Trinidad and Tobago. Who knows where that is? I feel like I should quiz you just to, you know that thing when kids tell you yes, but then you do the quiz and nobody really knows? Okay, I believe you. I believe you do. And I grew up, it's an island. It's beautiful. It's near the ocean, or at least where I lived was. And I grew up kind of a hippie. I grew up loving conservation stuff, and I was that kid who would bring the worms inside, much to my mother's chagrin and whatever. And but I grew up to the children of parents who meant well, but had never gone to college, and figured out through time that getting me to college, whatever happens there, is going to be the best idea. I have done 3 degrees, a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD. The PhD was painful. When I got done with it, I really felt proud of those 6 years because it really was tough. The master's was fine. I mean, it was 2.5 years. The bachelor's, I didn't really care per se. I just wanted to be done to move on to the next step. So it really caught me off guard when I saw my father crying for like 25 minutes at what to me was just a simple piece of paper that said Bachelor of Science in Biology. Because sometimes, I don't know how your parents are, there are things they don't tell you until they think you're old enough to handle that kind of information. So I know he was one of 13 siblings. I didn't know that they were homeless and that they were known as the kids who would beg the neighbors for food. I didn't know that of his 13 siblings, there were 6 fathers. I didn't know that he couldn't read until he was in his teenage years. I didn't know that his brothers were the best gamblers in the neighborhood. And the idea that somebody like him can produce an offspring who can get a bachelor's degree, much less anything after that, was beyond his wildest dreams. So if I looked at my lifestyle, I grew up middle class. There was always food to eat. There was always a uniform to go to school. But we wore uniforms in Trinidad, right? Thanks, England. So through my lens, right, there was no real struggle. And it's only in your later years that they consider and tell you, in order to make that happen, we had to do the following things. So somebody asked me today, one of the students in this room right now, asked me about the stress of doing things because your parents, the sacrifices they made. And my response to you is to own that. I know it could feel, if this has been, if this sounds a little bit similar to what your experience has been, and even if it hasn't, I want you to own that. I want you to understand, yes, it's going to feel a bit stressful. But I also want you to know that that could be something that helps you build resilience and perseverance. This bench right here is in the middle of the campus of Morehouse College. When I came to America in August 1999, F1 visa and I-20 in hand, to start what is now a 20-year journey into academia, my parents came with me. And at the end of orientation week, they sat me down on this bench and said, good luck. This is as far as we could take you. What you do from here is up to you. So 2 years from that point, when I'm sitting in my dorm room, looking at my physics grades and calculating that if I get the score that I knew I should have gotten on the final, my scholarship was bye-bye. And I was trying to figure out, how do I pick up the phone and tell these two people that I basically just messed it up? Thank God for a curve. I don't believe in curving, but it definitely helped me out that time. All right? We could have been having a very different conversation if that curve wasn't in place. Right? GPA scholarship requirement 3.0, GPA cumulative 3.01, my friends. All right? So if there was anything that gives you a kick in the pants, it's knowing how different your life could be. So I was still on the sort of conservation path, and I did, what every undergrad should do is do a bunch of different, internships and see what you like. And I got into a research program up in Smithsonian, and I did some marine biology work with crabs. And fell in love with that, all right? Decided to go to graduate school. So by now I'm 23. And did a master's doing some artificial reef stuff. A lot of fun. Went back for a PhD because I wanted it to be more focused on environmental conservation. And then one day they said, well, you have a TA-ship, so that means you have to teach a class. And that semester I taught a class and realized that my calling, my life's calling, was in something else. You never know. You never know when you're going to end up, where you're going to end up. Right? I mean, I know you're an undergrad. I know you're a grad student. I know you might be pursuing a degree that suggests to you have this limited range of options. But the kinds of problems we have to solve today in society, I want you to remain open to where you are needed. Because where you are needed mightn't look like the way jobs are defined right now. It might not look like the titles that you see right now. And you have to prepare yourself for doing something differently, but so long as it's addressing the question. So the first challenge I want to lay out, before we get into, study and all of that stuff. To me, all of that doesn't matter unless you can answer this question. What is your why? Why are you a bio major? Why are you a chemistry major? The answer could be, because my parents told me to be that. I know for some of you in this room, that is the answer. And you know what? Right now, if that is what it is, I'm going to say that is perfectly fine. I want you to think about what that means for you. So when I taught at Florida International University, the nation's largest Hispanic serving institution, for a lot of the students, when I asked them this question, they were being told, I have to be pre-med because this is the career that's going to afford me the kind of economic mobility my family and I need. It wasn't about love of medicine. It wasn't about love of science. It was about, we need to be climbing some ladders. And so you, 17-and-a-half-year-old, are going to help us do that by picking this particular major. So learning that we had to teach not biology, not science, not physics, not that stuff. We had to teach to who was in front of us. I found it some colleagues and I founded this program. And I'll send this link to Judy because I really want you all to take a look at this. We invited scientists from around the country. About 85% of them we invited were historically underrepresented minorities or female identifying. And we had them come and give a talk. And we said to them, don't come and tell us about your stupid protein you were investigating for last year. Like we find, it's a fine protein, right? But those are the kinds of talks you normally do, right? Sophomores don't really care about that yet. So you have 1 hour. Spend 15 minutes and give a general summary of why what you do is important, which is surprisingly really hard for people with PhDs. And then spend the next 35, 40 minutes talking about your life, how you got to where you are, the kinds of challenges you faced, all right? And how those challenges informed where you are right now. And it was so surprising how so many of them were never asked to do that. Because no one's stopping to ask you, what is your why? Now think about that for a second. You've gone through 3 degrees, and nobody asks you why you're doing it. And you look at your environment now and you see why, right? You come in, what do you want to be? A bio major. Okay, take these classes. Go on to this other class. Take the GRE, go to grad school. And then one day you wake up and like, what the hell was all that for? And it's so heartbreaking when this question is put to people later in life and they realize that all you did was just follow a pathway that was laid out before you, never really thinking if it meant anything to anybody other than I was good in this, so I just did it. So I do want you to go to that website. There's about 9 interviews, like Dr. Tyrone Hayes is on there talking about being the first black male from his town to go to Harvard and then coming to UC Berkeley. There's one story that really resonated with me was Dr. Helena Mayor, who was a Miami Dolphins cheerleader and was being told by her parents that good Cuban girls don't do science, but she just loved lemurs. So she wrote a grant to National Geographic that sent her to Madagascar, and she used that research to get a PhD from Stony Brook, and now she works for National Geographic. Can you imagine what that does to the students who are listening to that story? So, your tablecloths are disposable. And there are free pencils in front of you. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions throughout this. And what I'm going to ask you to do is write your answer on that and write it in such a way that you can rip a piece of that and take it home with you. Because I'm not interested in just coming here and giving you a bunch of stuff and then we upload and we go home. I want you to actually have a written record of what we talked about. So, Jenny?
There's a sticker at under here for one person at each table. That person wins the centerpiece. So if you're ripping this off, make sure you see who has the sticker.
Are we all looking for the sticker? All right. Your first question. Congratulations to those who got centerpieces tonight. Please take it home to your family. All right. Your first question is in front of you. 2.5 minutes. What is your why? You don't have to get fancy. You don't have to get too special. I just want your brain to start going. 2 minutes. I know it's not a lot of time, but go. All right, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds. I know there's a lot to write. Feel free to add it when you go home. So when I get the privilege to travel, I like to learn from the audiences I go and talk to. So I'm going to ask Jody to pass the mic. Is there anyone willing to share with me, just briefly, what their why is? Anyone willing to put their voice into a mic?
Okay,
Dana.
before we do this, I'm going to say one thing, which is when you speak into a handheld mic, you have to speak like this, like lollipop, right? So if it's out here, can't hear me. So you got to put it right up to your face. Where's my person?
Dana.
Hello. All right, so
Into your mouth, Dana.
lollipop. Okay. My why is to be able to pass on everything I've acquired as a student so that others don't have to go through the same struggles as I did. My why is to simplify other lives while improving mine.
Lift as you climb, brother. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I saw another hand.
Over there.
Lollipop, guys. My why is for my familia, which is my family.
Mm-hmm.
It's for my community, for myself, and my love for research and science. And it's also to pave a pathway for my little ones back home.
Thank you for sharing. Please keep this. Please keep this. You talk about your family, your parents, your community, right? You understand the role they play in where you are, and don't ever forget that. So if you have to take this and put it on your wall, do it. I'll take one more. Over there.
To create a more nature-loving, science-loving, and educated human population, the guardians of planet Earth.
Education is an act of freedom. The more educated we are, the more liberated your soul becomes. Thank you for sharing that. Please keep this. It's so easy to get locked into systems that just have you do and do and do and don't think. So keep this. I know it's a scribble. Add to it if you have to. But at major junctures in your life, whether it's every semester or otherwise, keep asking yourself that question. All right? I want to introduce you to one of my favorite colleagues, Dr. Sandra McGuire, who bases her entire study skills around what we call metacognition. So how do you know that you know something? I'm going to let you off the hook because I understand that for 12 years, and maybe even well into college, you were taught that knowing equates to A, B, C, or D. Or fill in the blank on a worksheet. But you think about it. If somebody had to do an open heart surgery on you, it doesn't matter if they got an A or B. It matters if they could actually cut you open and not cause you to bleed to death. So when you're actually doing a job, you're not measured by a letter grade or a GPA. You have to be able to do it, okay? So knowing that you can do something is the sense of agency you can exhibit in explaining a concept. Her steps, where she talks about how to study, and I'll share these slides with you. I encourage you to take notes, but I will share these slides with you. In my experience, most people go from preview to study and stop. All right? So here's an example conversation I have in my office. And by the way, this conversation comes from, so I didn't tell you all, I teach introductory biology. That's one of the classes I teach. 150 freshmen is a class I love because to me it's not about bio, it's about transitioning to college and being an emerging adult and what that's like. And on my first major exam, the last question is always, predict the score that you will get in this exam. And then I grade the exams, and the next day in class, I show a regression showing predicted versus actual. And for all the math stats people in here, the R squared is about 7%, right? If the prediction was perfect, it'd be 100%, which is pretty much impossible. But 7% is still pretty low. Because what happens is I have a lot of people, I'm going to get a 48, you got a 32. I'm going to get a 50, you got a 12. All right. It happens. But you know what? It is what it is. And here's the thing. Just to digress with the faculty here. The class is structured so that there's a lot of different kinds of assessments. There's homework, there's quizzes, there's these exams. But no assessment is so large that if you mess it up, you will fail the course. And that is intentional because I understand when you come into my class for the first time as a college student, you might mess up in that first exam for reasons other than your ability to do the actual work. You might not have figured out how to study yet. You might not feel a sense of belonging at this university yet. You may not have had financial aid yet. You may not have had a meal. And so I need to figure out all those things before I start holding you fully accountable for that sense of agency I'm talking about. Okay? So this conversation, so that student who said 45 and got a 20, all right, I'm bringing them in. And the question is, okay, so you thought you were going to get an A and that clearly didn't happen. So let's talk about how you prepared. Well, you know, I stayed up all night and I just studied really hard. All right, so what does study really hard mean? You know, I just put a lot of effort into my studying. So then I have to get really specific. Walk me through from the moment you sat down at your desk to when you got up. Like, tell me every single thing you did. And so now we start getting into, I underlined every word in the chapter. I made a bunch of flashcards. I reread the notes from class. I rewatched the video you posted. So at what point did you assess yourself to know that you actually knew what the concept is? Right? Because when you come to tutoring and you come to my office and I explain how DNA replicates, for example, the exam is not going to be on how well you can watch me explain it. The exam is going to be on how you explain it. So there needs to be at some point in your study process where you can get up in front of a mirror or a whiteboard or to a friend who's a different major and explain to them what this is and be so confident that they could ask you questions and you know you can answer them. That's the bar. And I understand that you probably spent the last 4 years of your life filling out a bunch of worksheets and you know, doing every bad study strategy in the book. So now I have to deconstruct that and reconstruct your idea of what it means to know. So for faculty, the complaint is always, oh, kids today don't know how to study. They know how to study because the way they studied worked very well up until this point. So who the hell are you to suddenly come and say, oh, you have to do X? It got them A's. It got them into your stupid classroom. So of course they'll do the same thing. So now you have to explain why that thing wasn't working. Even the concept of explaining something to somebody else. I mean, it might sound intuitive to you, right? But it actually takes a while, I think, for especially college freshmen to internalize it. So I would like a volunteer. Somebody who, okay, well, you put a hand up before I even gave it some caveats. Can you give it a mic? I'd like you to join me over here in the middle, if you don't mind.
Okay.
What's your name?
Sanam.
Sadam?
Sanam, yes.
Okay, thank you. Very nice. I'm Brian. Nice
Hello.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Sadam, where are you from?
I'm from the Bay Area.
Bay Area? Which part of the Bay Area?
Walnut Creek, it's like East Bay.
East Bay, okay.
Yeah.
I like when people say the Bay Area, like it's like one thing, it's like 9 different towns. Okay. But I've been up there, it's very nice.
Yeah, it's really nice.
What, other than school, what do you like to do for fun?
I like to go outside.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a double major in neuroscience and environmental
So
studies.
other than school, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Go on.
No, you say that, and then I think, okay, going outside is my way for having fun, but in a way too, going outside does incorporate a lot of my school studies,
all right.
like environmental studies.
Okay. So when you look back at your life till this point, other than school, can you tell me something you think you're very good at? And it could be anything, right? It doesn't have to be something spectacular. Like, I don't know, I can cook baba ganoush really well. I don't know. I'm just picking something.
I would say that I'm really good at just like planning events, which is, oh God.
Planning events?
Planning events, which is like weird, but I
Mm,
really.
what kind of events?
Like student, just student like learning experience events. Like I'm an RA in college and like I do that, but what I enjoy, and I guess in a way what's my why, is I really want students to just understand that like your GPA isn't you.
Right,
I don't
right.
know.
So can you tell me
What
the
am I-
last student event that you planned?
The last one,
Mm-hmm.
it was a pizza party.
A pizza party.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have an audience of very beautiful, intellectual, and hungry for knowledge.
Oh, God.
Well, you just ate, man. Come on. All right. And most, if not any of them, have done any kind of event planning. So if one of them, if this was a class in event planning, and you had to teach them how to put on a kick-ass pizza party to talk about learning, walk us through the steps of what that would sound like.
Okay. I think typically.
And remember,
Yes.
when they hear your explanation, they should be able to go and be able to plan an event on their own.
Okay.
Now go.
Okay. So typically when it comes to planning events, there's kind of a general group with the idea. So you have your team in a way, or if you're working solo, then you can go ahead and make connections. So typically with an event, say one focused on student learning, I would probably go ahead, contact some of my professors, like professors that I've had good experiences with.
So, Saram, what I'm going to do, not to be rude, I'm going to interrupt you to
okay.
ask questions.
Okay.
And the point is not to be rude, but for clarity.
Yes.
Because remember, you're talking to novices,
Yes.
right? People in here don't plan stuff. We're all like lazy and we don't do stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when you say team, what kind of team?
A group with similar ideas and similar goals.
Okay. So how do you ensure that there isn't conflict on the team?
How do you ensure that there's
No
what?
conflict on
No
the team.
conflict?
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
You can't.
You
So how
never
do you
can.
manage conflict?
That's mainly just communication, like
Uh-huh.
talking it out, recognizing that everyone in the team is an individual with different ideas and everyone has something to offer.
Okay, okay. And so you talked about contacting professors. What's that like? What's the means for contact?
Okay.
And what do you ask them?
Oh. I would say, so I've had various professors in my time. I've had the like younger professors who have like all their different things. And then I have one professor I had one who probably just changed my whole view of learning at UCSC. Brought back the power of like what it means to be a student and gave me confidence. And I mean like office hours, like super available, being there, but also like in class, not only engaging the students with the material, but also like.
So you would contact that person just
Oh,
by
yeah.
email to come and
Oh, yeah.
do what at your event?
Yes.
But what would they do at your event?
Just talk. They just conversations.
Just conversation.
Typically, I like events that are more not so much like I like discussion-based events, like where people can like communicate, not necessarily one person that's like talking, but like having everyone get together and like just debate different things.
Okay. So, based on the evidence of the students that I've met today, I am 100% confident that if you attended an event that Saram organized, it would be wonderful. But I'm also 100% sure that if she taught a class in event planning, you'd probably have a whole day where you talk to your students about how do you form a good team? How do you handle conflict? Which professors do you contact? And how do you begin that engagement? And what kind of structure would you provide for them in order to begin a conversation? But because you are so good at what you do, you have that curse of knowledge. So you can come up here and confidently just, we'll have a team, contact that professor, 5 p.m. in this hall, and we're going to get it going.
But explaining it is hard.
It is.
It's so
right?
hard. I'm like,
And it's a different level of knowledge. And that is why, for anybody in this room who's a tutor or an RA or an SI leader, you would have learned in the process of doing that job that having to tutor somebody is a whole different level of learning something. Please give a round of applause to Saram for being so brave.
Thank you.
Thank you. She didn't see. It's fine. Thank you, Saram. Again. Thank you for being a guinea pig. I wanted to put out somebody on the spot, but I hope in the process you saw what I was trying to extract. Like what she just did is something you as a student, if you're really interested in knowing, so not just get an A in this class and get a B, like if you really want to understand something, you want to get to a point where you are here and able to exhibit that sense of agency that people who don't have that curse of knowledge really, really get it. I think this is encapsulated in this quote, which, by the way, Einstein never said, but I was told that once and I always keep forgetting to change the slide. But I love the quote so much that I use it in my class today. That's how we start the class. First day of class, and we repeat this every week. All right? We have 150 students, and yes, we do 6 short answers. We do some multiple choice. We do all the good stuff about how you write good multiple choice questions. But I want them writing. And for me, it's not just a matter of being able to explain a concept. I'm looking at, and this is where I think teaching is an act of social justice and beyond that. I need you to be able to advocate for your future. I need you to be able to find your voice, and when you see something that you don't agree with, that you have the skills to go and look at data and challenge and critique. And even though my class is bio and we're talking about DNA and double helix and all that stuff, giving you the practice to be able to exhibit that confidence, to explain and to challenge and to debate confidently, I believe that's a skill that could transfer to any part of your life. Education is not preparation for life, it is life. These are the things that, even though you do it in an intro bio classroom today, you will do it as a 39-year-old. When you're advocating for professors who are experiencing a different experience to yours. When you're advocating for your students like Jody does today. When you're advocating for your neighbors, for nonprofits. This is where you practice that skill. So, I know that when you talk about studying and being a STEM learner, your idea might just be about science. But even though I teach science, I'm really not that interested in just talking about science. I'm interested in you cultivating the skills where you are always advocating for life. I just want to close by giving a quick shout out to a group of wonderful students I met at Florida International University. So I was, just to give you a bit more history, when I moved to Miami in 2003, I literally moved there because I wanted to do marine biology, and the water there is the warmest in the US. So California was clearly out at that time. Okay. Also, I had a girlfriend in Trinidad, and Miami was closer to Trinidad than any other part of the US. That relationship didn't work out, but career-wise, things sort of, fell into place. And I learned pretty early on. I was a pretty bad TA in the beginning. And I learned I was a bad TA because people, the students called me out and I didn't know who they were. I didn't know why they were being bio majors. I didn't know why they were so obsessed with being doctors. And when I took the time to talk to them and they shared their stories with me about immigrating to the US and pursuing medicine and law because they felt that was the only way they could make any kind of economic mobility in the US, that touched me in a way that I could never look back on. And that's why I urge professors every time I travel, find a way to get the stories of your students. When you hear them try to advocate for who they are and what their why is, there is no way you can teach the same way you did before that. You can't unknow or unsee that kind of knowledge. And this group of students, that year I actually won the TA of the Year award. And I insisted that they took the picture with me and all the students that I taught. And I always credit them with teaching me that skill, and it's a skill I hope to carry wherever I go. And I hope I was able to share some of that with you. So I will close there. Please please take your what is your why with you today, with you home today. We do have a few minutes if you have any questions for me, but other than that, you've been a great audience. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Saram. So as Jody walks around with the mic, if you have a question, you could raise your hand and she'll follow you. I'll go back on stage.
Hello, it's me again.
Hello.
Okay. My question is, I think oftentimes, at least just like where we are now in like the society with like grades, for example, like the ABC grading. Oftentimes, like as a student, it's hard to separate yourself from your grades and see yourself separate from your grades and like acknowledge that you are also like a human being. And I could say that like I've gotten some grades before and immediately like I felt like my personality, like me, I felt like I failed. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it made me completely, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't even be here. Like maybe I shouldn't be at school. And then like, how, like as a teacher, like how do you advise like trying to kind of battle that like inner dilemma, like the paradox in your head? It's like you want to be a good student and do well, but then sometimes you don't do as well, and then you're kind of having this inner conflict of your worth.
I think there's a lot of loaded terms in your question that needs unpacking. And some of them include not doing well, or what grading or assessment even means. And I want to submit to you that if you struggle in a course and get a grade that you don't think is reflective of your ability, there are likely very, very specific reasons why that grade was obtained. And not all of those reasons are necessarily your fault. I'm not trying to get students off the hook, but understand, at least in my perspective, education is a dialogue. All right? And so it is my job as instructor to build the kind of class and assessment structure that truly reflects what your ability, not ability, but what your effort really is. Okay? So if I have a class where there's 3 exams, 33% each, and for any reason at all, like, I don't know, you miss a shift at work, and you mess up one exam and you get a D, yeah, you got a D because you didn't do well in the exam, but there are other reasons that I'm not capturing. So some of the best conversations I have with students, I think to help that kind of feeling, is let's get very, very specific. That's what that slide was about. So I don't just want to be like, you know, I did badly and I don't know, because if you don't have a reason, that's when you start getting the thoughts of, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm not a physics person. Maybe I'm not a math person. Okay? So let's get really specific and talk about when you are practicing this. So I've given you many opportunities to practice. What are you actually doing? And let's zero in and identify what's missing and work on that. So that way, when you go back to the drawing board, you have something you can actually act on and not just, I'll study harder. Because you'll just do more of the same bad thing. Okay? Thanks for your question.
Hey, thank you so much for that. That was really wonderful.
My pleasure.
So we are in a room full of people, I assume, who really care about education.
People of what?
Who really care about education and the education of students and peers. But it's not uncommon to get a student who comes into your space of education who is distraught by the rest of the establishment in the academy. How do you go about handling when a student comes into your educational space and they feel neglected by the rest of the academy?
You all came prepared today, boy. It's a tough and personal question because I was that student at probably every level, every degree I've gone through, right? And I think earlier today somebody was asking me about, I think it was Paloma was asking me about what my why is. And part of my why is I sat in classrooms where I was told, look to your left, look to your right. Two of you won't be here. And I was told that, yeah, you might get a job because you're a black student and they want black people on their faculty. So I've heard a lot of this kind of language through the years. And I feel somewhat privileged to have risen above all of it and still get where I need to go. And so I think that the lesson in that for me is when I have a student who might feel that way about everything else they're hearing, I have to know I am charged to teach them. Put that to the side and let's figure out how you can define what your own space is. Okay, so maybe at your institution, there are 2 or 3 people who you can go to, who you can have that trusting, authentic dialogue relationship with. All right? And maybe in that class where they act that particular way, maybe you sort of put your head down and just kind of do your thing. But use that to tell yourself, and this is my challenge to all of the students in here, when you become professors, when you become doctors, when you become lawyers, when you become whatever you do, please, please, please make as an essential part of your mission to not be that. All right? Lift as you climb, as my brother said. All right? So it is so easy, especially in this system, to just kind of like you get to where you go, you get your nice middle class lifestyle, you take care of your family. No. Think about what you went through and commit to being a part of what the change could look like. So it might mean when you teach differently. It might mean when you advise differently. It might mean when you mentor young doctors, you use different kinds of language. But using negativity to figure out what the better way is, and you be that better way. All right, so I hope I answered your question. It's different for every student. But I think in general, that's a kind of a good way to think about it. Thanks for your question. In front.
So a couple of things that you mentioned about like being a good teacher and being in the past. You're saying that it's really important to know about like what the backgrounds of the students are, and currently here as well. And I was wondering, as like a TA, what would you recommend a TA to do in order to be able to get to better know the students?
I actually think TAs are much better positioned most times than professors to get to know the students in intimate ways. At least when I was a TA, what I found happened was I was old enough to be a mentor, but and when I say old, I mean in terms of career stage, but young enough to not be seen as somebody so, far removed from their experience that I couldn't get what they were going through. So for that reason, when I was a TA, there was a large number of students who were much more comfortable with me having certain kinds of conversations than sometimes they are when I am now like with the shirt and tie and all that BS, right? And in addition, a lot of TAs teach labs, which by definition are supposed to be active, right, in small groups, and if you're doing experiments, etc. So as opposed to a large class where whether you lecture or don't lecture, there's a lot of you and then stuff happens, right? With a lab, there's a lot of opportunities to sort of walk around, engage with people, field questions, and I know Jody has started a lot of kind of pedagogy around TAs, but conventionally TAs are not taught to use that opportunity to develop dialogue, right? And so I would encourage you to do that. You would be surprised at how much they're willing to share and ask. I think it was this morning when I gave the talk, one professor was saying a grad student in his class just peppered him with questions about like, should I be a professor? Should I be this? And so you'd be surprised at the kinds of questions people have in different situations. So I would just encourage you to do it.
Hello, my name is Ashley, and I'm an applied physics major. I am a transfer. I was a transfer, and I actually chose this major very late in the years. I didn't have any math background, much background in math. I found out about physics when I was 24 for the first time. So I had no idea about physics. And starting at a university and going through a quarter system, which is really fast-paced for STEM majors, was quite challenging for me. And so the question is, for students like me who doesn't really have much background, like who doesn't have a lot of tools to do physics well, how do we make sure students like me are successful in the quarter system where it's so fast, where we can't really take an extra time to study on the side what we didn't learn compared to what other students learned? Other than taking a break from school and then studying on your own, maybe taking 2 years out of community college or something and building those skills and coming back to university. But in terms of the length of the schooling that requires, it's not very ideal. So how do we solve this problem of meeting different levels of math and just different levels of knowledge, and making sure that these students can succeed in the college and get their degree?
So how do you feel about the East Coast? We do semesters. Yeah, I make light of it, but I'm not trying to. But I am actually kind of trying to speak to a bigger issue, and that is when we do talks like this, and even talks like what we had this morning. We talk about inclusion. We talk about good teaching practices for students. I am very aware that these things don't occur in a vacuum, all right? And if there isn't an infrastructure in place around the teaching and around the students to help enable that success to happen, then you could use all the clickers in the world and it's not gonna matter, right? So I'll be honest with you, I don't have personal experience with the quarter system. I've always been in semesters all my life. However, I do teach a class that coming with very, very different levels of preparedness. So one of the things I do before I meet my freshmen, I send them a 10-question survey, and one of the questions is, when last did you take a science class? Not biology, science. Sometimes the answer is middle school. Sometimes the answer is, I was in an honors program at this private school in northeastern Massachusetts, and everyone's in the same class. So it brings up a very unique pedagogical challenge, right? And I tried to solve that I do a lot of small group work, all right? So there's a few things I do. One of them is I do a lot of small group work, and I mix the students who come in with different levels of preparedness. And the ones who are flying, or at least think that they're flying, the lesson to them is, okay, you may have gotten DNA replication in the first 5 minutes, or at least it seems that you have. Make sure everybody else in your group gets it as well as you do. And so now you learn what it means not just to know something or get a question right in a quiz. You actually have to lift somebody else up, all right? We have 4 learning assistants in the class. Each learning assistant has 1 2-hour session that happens once a week. I have an office hours every week for 3 hours. And that's held, by the way, in the dorm. So it's held in the bottom floor because there's room and 35 people can come. And there's about 15 hours of supplemental modules that students can take. So hear me out. The point here is not that a student who's struggling has to do every single hour of work I just described. The point here is that for somebody who's struggling and who may not have a strong background, there are different things that might get them entered into the class. So they might hear me explain something and it might not make any sense. But as soon as the LA explains it, it snaps. They might hear the LA explain something, might not make any sense. But as soon as somebody from their group who gets it and says it in their own unique student way, somehow it resonates. So the course is set up so they have multiple ways to hear the same thing or practice the same thing, right? In the hope or in the belief that through one of those ways they'll actually get the concept. Now, what I just described is a pedagogy thing, right? That's the way I structure my class. I'm not saying there isn't work that you don't have to do to try and come to office hours and things like that. But I'm saying that a lot of what you're talking about does rely on having the kind of instructor who's willing to set up that type of ecosystem. Does that make sense? And I mean, based on my conversations with Jody, I know there's a lot of great faculty here who are doing these kinds of things. But in addition, I would urge you to go see her. And then there's a whole lot of things around learning commons and things you could do outside of class to support you. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the quarter system, but that's my bias. But in lieu of you convincing your provost to just blow that thing up and go semesters, go to my first suggestion. Thanks for your question.
From your presentation, you talked about how you talked to your students about what they did to study for like an exam, and you talked to them about why you think you got the score and why you didn't achieve it. Or so the question is, from talking to all your students, what have been the similarities you've seen like in their study methods? Did they use effective studying skills? How did they avoid like procrastination, methods like that?
So the question is, have I seen patterns in the effective study skills? Or the not effective study skills?
Like, from talking to them, have you noticed like any like effective study methods that students have used, like in your classes or other classes?
Absolutely. The ones who are effective are the ones who have an assessment built into their study plan. So,
What does that mean?
I was about to explain that. There's reading that has to happen. There are videos you can watch that explains how something works. But at some point before a quiz or an assessment or a day of class even, there needs to be some amount of time spent where on your own you are saying glycolysis is. The Krebs cycle happens in this way. And that needs to be unassisted and it needs to be correct. And so the ones who get that, the ones who get to that last step are the ones who are successful. And what I learned over the years is I probably wasn't doing a good enough job of giving them practice within classroom time on what that sounds like. So I started using this tool, which I love. Oh my God, the name is slipping me. Anyway, it comes out of University of Michigan, from Michigan State. And essentially, I will ask them a question in class, similar to a short answer I would ask on an exam. And they would write their answer into this program on their computers or their smartphones. And then from my computer, I will switch the answers anonymously. So everyone in this room will get an answer from somebody new without knowing who it is. And you have to critique that answer and give them feedback. And then I switch it back. And then you have to rewrite your answer based on the feedback that you got. And boy, oh boy, did the quality of writing go up. And so it's not just the quality of writing, but there needs to be an explicit, you are explaining this on your own. And so if you're asking me about one pattern of effective approaches, it's that. That's the thing. The students who do the best, no matter where they come in from and what level, they figure out that at some point I have to be alone in a whiteboard or with a friend who's studying with me, and on my own I have to write this out or explain it to you. Some of the other things like procrastination, they are a bit systemic. Well, they're not quite systemic, but they are situational factors, right? I have a lot of kids who work 40 hours a week. All right, I have a lot of kids who have to go home on weekends to take care of family. So when I develop assignments and things like that, I have to be mindful of what time they actually have available to do good work. So I hedge a little bit with the procrastination stuff because I do get that sometimes it's not that I really want to wait to the last minute. It's because life continues to happen in addition to my class. So I try to be a little bit careful with how I assign things. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
One more. There it is.
I have more like of like hypothetical question. So let's say you were like forming your own community school, or you were
That's a perfect end question there. I like it already. Go on.
what is something you would avoid copying from institutions you've been in, or what is something that you feel like you really want to implement into this new school you're forming?
Do we have like 2 more hours we could talk about that? There's a whole lot of this system that I want to change. I can't, it's hard to list just one thing. I think that the way in which we view what a faculty member does needs to be drastically uprooted. And that is everything from how teaching is evaluated, how it's viewed as a skill, what the expectations of somebody who's in a classroom looks like. And that's going to take a lot more than just inviting somebody from the East Coast to come and talk about it. It's going to take some bravery. It's going to take somebody who has the political capital to say this entire system might need to get redone. And you're absolutely right. It might take a new school for that to happen. All right. And to be fair, there are some examples of people who are taking those brave steps. So it's not all gloom and doom. What I would take with me are the ways in which student voices have advocated for change and forced real, authentic, sustaining change because of it. It's a little unfortunate because for me, from my lens, I would like to hope that at some point we don't need to take over administration buildings and shut down campuses in order to get equity. Right? Like, you would hope you don't see these extreme negative incidents before we realize, oh, we need to do something. But we're not there yet. But I'm glad that in spite of that, the fact that we're not there, that when students see these things, they're not quiet about it. All right? So there are a lot of voices out there who are saying things like, kids today are too sensitive and they want to be cuddled. Tune them out. You see it, call it for what it is, and force them to respond and listen to you. Because these are your dollars and this is your space. I mean, I just want to leave you with a last comment. So you may or may not have heard the music that was playing when I walked up on stage. This was the fabulous Jenny Quinn's request. She asked me what my playlist was, and I sent her a song from my country, Trinidad and Tobago. It's called soca music. Soca means a mix of soul and calypso. The history of calypso and that kind of music is when the slaves were emancipated, they took to the streets and they danced in costumes and they beat whatever drums and metal they could find. And the idea of being released from 300 years of bondage was something that you can't imagine what that feels like, right? And so one line of that song says, "We are the sound of 10,000 coming down the road." And I want to impress upon you that no matter where you go and what you do, don't feel you have to check who you are at the door. All right? So how I am in the streets of Providence, how I am in the classroom, like I don't code switch in that way. You get the same Bryan. And I need to be that authentic because otherwise what I do just can't be that way. And you need to take that with you. So in the same way you can call the administration to their feet about things that aren't right, do the same in whatever practice you take on. Thank you for being with me tonight. It was totally worth 15 hours of flying. It really was. I'm not just saying that. You've been great hosts. Enjoy the rest of your quarter. Or semester.